After all this, you still...
I still want that gas, yes. And you had better deliver.
Hey folks, welcome back to the Greenhouse. It's me and Josh again with another current affairs recap. I seem to have learned my lesson from not posting as often. So let's keep this momentum going because we are finally ahead of the ball on this one. What prompted me to get started on this episode was actually the recent Supreme Court ruling, which was what was the case? EPA versus West Virginia. I forget who the plaintiff and defendant was in this case. And it basically was the verdict from the Supreme Court was the EPA does not have the authority to regulate emissions coming from power plants. And I think the response to that was pretty, what was to be expected. But just, another piece of bad news on top of a sequence of just bad calls from the Supreme Court this summer.
Oh yeah, I mean this. Yeah, you're absolutely right. This. And I'm still trying to reel in from trying to figure out if I can somehow prove that I am Elon Musk's 10th son, or 10th child at this point. But this EPA thing in the court and ruling in general. I mean, it has a lot of weird implications more generally, because it could mean, it could mean the end of the bureaucratic state for the United States, right? Because the underpinning of this argument is that Congress cannot, vaguely, in quotations, like delegate authority to the EPA or any bureaucratic agency for that matter. It seems like it could, extend that. The seemingly weird, AstroTurf Republican campaign on this is that it's because Congress didn't do its job, and you got to make Congress do its job to get this thing. But it seems like kind of bullshit. And anyone who says that, I think, immediately exposes how uneducated they are. You'd think the Clean Air Act would be pretty clear in what its intention is. Clean Water Act, all those things would be pretty obvious in what they intend to do, but not good enough for, Neil Gorsuch and friends.
Which is, it's funny considering all the players involved. One, Gorsuch being from a family of EPA administrators is kind of funny that this is his ultimate take on it. And also just I guess there's something to be said about Republican administrators within the EPA, but I'm going to get to that point in just a second. And this is again a talking point that is kind of lazily deployed, and one of those ones that's kind of been a holdover from the formation of the EPA at the start of its inception. Is Congress kind of creates the Clean Water and Clean Air Act, kind of as a response to the crisis of the manufacturing state, and as it's starting to get phased out, and delegating that authority to the EPA is just, it's common sense American federalism, right? Where, Congress has no means to enforcing this, so it needs to, create an executive agency. And as far as I understand, as much as Nixon's wing of the party may have opposed it, it came out to be the best compromise for what was needed. And it is arguably toothless in some ways, but effective in others.
Well, and when it was created by the Nixon camp, it was largely because there was so much momentum in favor of this sort of congressional adapted version of the EPA. They were going to kind of give one that had a little bit more strength behind it. So this was a means of sort of, undercutting that. You still get people to this day talking about how Nixon was this great liberal for creating the EPA and all of that. It's just this really weird. There's a long and storied history behind the creation of the EPA and whatnot that is sort of confounded in the midst of all that stuff. And regardless, I mean, you can use that as an explanation for this ruling, or you can just accept the fact that the Supreme Court probably always has, but especially under the Roberts Court, is kind of the mindset we see an outcome that we want, and we will write some words that like vaguely lead to that destination, under the guise of existing legal jargon and the nonsense.
Yeah, and that kind of is like, unfortunately, the standard for environmental law from the Roberts Court. I think a couple years ago there was that ruling they made on what counts as a federal waterway and what doesn't. Bringing up the Commerce Clause of all things for that one, but some of the responses I had seen in response to this decision were kind of like, this is more, of the standard talking points we've come to receive from conservative media and conservative groups who have that kind of anti-environmental messaging from being beholden to the coal lobby, which is kind of
well, and that messaging, you do get the explicit, like, sort of celebration of this, but you get more of that, like, sort of stealthy, like, similar to what you got out of the abortion ruling, right? Where you get more of this kind of like, oh, this is actually preserving your freedom because now you get to choose, you get more control than these, bureaucrats or the federal government. Ooh, like, now you can vote for members of Congress who will like create super specific environmental laws, which, I mean, when was the last meaningful environmental act passed?
Or even just in the present Democratic base, like what is the environmental movement other than like a patronage arm at this point?
Yeah.
Where it's pretty much desperately like for just lip service to climate change, vote Democrat. And yeah, some of the stuff surrounding this case that I found interesting is it ties back to this clean power rule that was planned to be implemented under the Obama administration, never really put into place. And basically, kind of like the Supreme Court's prior decision on what counts as a waterway and what doesn't, this seems to be another attempt to be like, no, you guys don't get to make this call. And what's interesting to me is this has implications to the Biden administration, and this is why I mentioned reactions to this incident at the like when I started this. I know I'm always in my word pasta salad, so let me try to untangle it in real time here. One of the responses I had seen when this happened was, okay, this sucks, but what was the EPA going to do meaningfully? And that's a fair concern to have, especially with how cynical we've all become lately. But one of those throwaway campaign pledges from the Biden administration and one of the EPA directives was to reduce carbon emission sources at by 2035, right? That's one of those major reasons we were kind of all coerced into voting for Biden. That was one of the things where it's like, I mean, this is the threadbare climate action you're getting if you don't vote for Trump. And basically this ruling guts the EPA's ability to do that. You could argue they have other means around it, but according to the current EPA administrator, they're like, yeah, this sets us off target. This isn't good.
Yeah.
And I was I shared these articles from NPR as part of the research. I didn't realize exactly how much of the coverage of this is getting shaded behind some very shifty characters. So remember what I was saying earlier about Gorsuch and his connection to the EPA by different family connections? Yeah, so there's a lot of like weird Republican connections within the EPA that I think people should just be aware of. And just be careful who gets like when they say someone's an ex-EPA administrator, check under who they served, right? So this NPR article, they interviewed former EPA head William K. Riley. Now, if you don't know who that is, he was the EPA administrator under George H.W. Bush. Now you might think, well, okay, like that can't exactly be the worst thing. You can't just like, put all the Republicans in a bag and say they're bad. Fair enough. Fair enough. What if I told you this guy is also a director for ConocoPhillips, which is a hydrocarbon company, Royal Caribbean International, which is the cruise lines managing company, and also he was appointed the co-chair of the commission after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. And there were many concerns brought up at the time that like this guy's kind of connected to the oil industry. Why does he get a seat here? So in his comments to NPR's Michael Martin, I'm trying. Let me pull up the exact fucking line that really had me like rolling my eyes a little. So quoting Riley, the Clean Power Rule recognized that a major source of greenhouse gas in the United States comes from the electrical generating industry. It set out to improve their performance by moving them towards renewable fuels. It necessarily had to address the principal source of greenhouse gases in the electricity generating field, and it was coal-fired power plants. And it did that in a very explicit way. It was the explicitness of the intention to remove a fuel source from the country that drew the ire of the Supreme Court in this case, who said that was farther than EPA had ever gone before. Usually they try to clean up an industry. They don't try to eliminate the source of a very fact of the industry. Now, this might seem innocuous in liberal circles or even just like mainstream political discourse at this point, but that line is very telling. And I looked at it even further, where Martin pushes Riley on this, and Riley then responds with the advice to the agency is stay in your lane. Don't explicitly aim to do anything so sweeping. So like I mentioned earlier, there's that kind of cynical response of, what is it the EPA is going to do meaningfully? Then there even are these like kind of threadbare targets, or what you could even consider inadequate targets of like trying to curb emissions by 2035. What gets understated in a lot of these environmental regulation conversations, or even like climate change, right, is everyone will fundamentally say the magic words, we got to do something about climate change. But any transformational activity, or even any like reckoning of what underpins energy production or the economy in the United States, is verboten. It's haram. You cannot look at it in any meaningful way. And for a this guy who gets to call himself like a resistance liberal because he didn't vote for Trump, but not really changing his tone on what radical and drastic action is needed to be taken, on top of being a hydrocarbon exec, it's telling. It's very telling what people are thinking even as this is happening. And I think a lot of people are talking about like, oh, we're entering the cool zone, and the consent manufacturing machine is running on hyperdrive. To some extent, yeah, but it also is this fact of like, look who's doing it, and look who's telling you, and consider why.
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of, I mean, to be fair, I don't necessarily think that the concept of these, if the agency heads or former agency heads, I mean, I think the Trump administration sort of highlighted the fault with that as like a line on the resume or the CV, right? You had a lot of people who it was openly talked about, like, this person is there to dismantle that agency or to undermine it in some way. And that was the whole point. It's like, well, why would this person who's like his entire career has been doing the opposite of what this agency stands for? It's like, well, yeah, that's the point. And it's kind of always been the point. I mean, I think Republicans used to be a little bit more tactful, a little bit more willing to toe the line of lip service. I think, even environmentally, you used to have like the conservationist conservatives. That term is basically dead. No one, I think, openly identifies that way anymore, unless some wacko on Twitter tells you that he is. But no elected official like openly identifies that way anymore. Like it's just kind of this foregone thing. It's it's the whatever embrace of environmental protection that you had once upon a time was, it was always tempered by this small government, laissez-faire attitude, but it's been completely subsumed by this, radical, liberation theology that, like God will provide all that you need. You don't need to worry about,
the
government protecting, being the stewards of the environment or anything like that.
Yeah, like any of those people have either meaningfully migrated to like liberal nonprofit environmentalism or have fully embraced eco-fascism, if anything. But you're right that basically it's viewed as like a how dare you think you're above God by trying to mitigate for environmental damage,
or just the denial that it will actually impact human life.
Yeah. It's very, we're still in that phase of like trying to figure out what is to be done, right? We're still in that sense of, okay, the Supreme Court has basically, pulled the rug on us on multiple fronts. How do you even respond, especially when, we're shaping up to Biden still wanting to run again in the primaries? We may even have a Hillary versus Biden primary in 2024. And
the Supreme Court's taken up the what is the exact terminology? It's taken up the a case that will test the independent electoral nature of states and basically allow them to at the state level control federal elections, so they can, for instance, legally carry out what Trump had asked of them in 2020. Because again, that was the only problem, not the principle that it's completely undemocratic and awful for our society that a state legislature could just say, fuck it, we don't want what the people want and we will force that upon you. Now it's that objection will be gone, the extent to which it existed on that side. So yeah, I mean, the court is, it's in one term has kind of, and the next term is just shaping up to look bad too, especially if there's anything else tied to other agencies that could get depowered in any meaningful fashion. Yeah, I mean, it's not good. The court is kind of it's really, and there's no meaningful response to it from just a general sense of like, how do we like curb this court? How do we like, do something to get it under control? Because clearly it's just fully in this embittered conservative pocket now. But even from the just purely from the environmental stuff, I think a major blow to this is a blow to like the environmental movement in the United States, but the bigger long-standing impact that I think has just sort of drained this movement is there's just the lack of focusing events. The environmental movement is, I wouldn't say without any guidance, but it's it's not focused on any actionable objectives in a more larger sense, right? You don't have like the reason why you had the creation of the EPA and Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, etc. was you had like really obvious environmental damage, right? You had rivers that caught on fire and lakes.
You had smog all over the place. Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. And like there's without those things, I'm not necessarily sure that you'll be able to, that this movement's going to be able to not only like focus on clear objectives but like ones that are going to be salient enough to get the public behind them. The public in general is supportive of like, we want a green earth, good environment, like, but there's not, what that means is just so confounded, right? I mean, we're kind of, even just the way that we're sort of nurtured about it, it's kind of this mix of like, well, you're the reason why the ozone's going to die if you run your sprinkler on
very personal responsibility kind of thing.
Very personal, like, oh, that bit of litter that you left on the trash, not in the trash but on the ground, that is going to kill the planet. Not this big power plant here. The fact that you left a can in the grass, plant's done.
That's a fucking great point, and I share that observation too, right? Because we are conditioned to think about environmental issues from a position of personal responsibility. It's you as a consumer and your choices that create the totalizing environmental impact. Forgetting the fact that we're kind of locked into this economic order. Us as citizens, we don't really have a say in it, especially these days. And like you said, like, what is there to cohere around? And just my own observation of what constitutes the environmental sector in the United States. A lot of it is formed in the wake of the regulatory sphere. Some of it is like, things that do like cleanup of plumes and shit, or there's like different things for like conserving like lands, invasive species management. There's that side of it. Then there's the nonprofit advocacy sector, and a lot of it exists basically, you could argue in the harshest form, this is to launder rich people's money so it doesn't get taxed. And in a more forgiving way, you could also say that what they basically do is they try to do what they can without upsetting the status quo. And I think the only coherent new articulation we had of this that had any kind of mainstream appeal was, the Green New Deal proposal. Because especially like my conception of environmental issues is I don't see them as things that have to be seen as separate. And that's something we grow up with, is, seeing the environment as a separate thing. It's something that's separate from you. It's these wild lands that have to be protected, but the cities.
And more importantly, I think the Green New Deal killed another really important separation, which is the idea that, and the way we're kind of taught about it in school and whatnot too, is that it's environmentalism or it's, industry and people being employed and having something.
And that's exactly what I was going to get to, is like with this nonprofit space, they are frightened to speak up about, any possible change to the economic order. Because like I said, we're locked into this consumer system. And we talked about this in the past, that like, we consume at the expense of the world. People in the third world have to suffer to get us things here, and we kind of consume with impunity here in the United States, blah, blah, blah. We've all heard that. But then there is also that fact of like, me as an individual citizen, because I didn't have access to recycling, or because like I bought the wrong thing or whatever, or even worse, like the only way I can like get stuff is, locking into big agribusiness that's sold at my supermarket instead of growing my own food. And me as a renter, how am I going to grow my own food to begin with? Stuff like that. You know what I mean? So, what the Green New Deal was, even though it wasn't built this way, or even it wasn't, because this is a big project of communicating this to people, right? Is how do you get people to view all these interconnected issues and say that the economy is not something separate, it's part of an integrated whole, and how we address the environment is part of that. How we address jobs is part of that. The restructuring of the economic order is also an ecological project. It's also an economic project. It's also a human project if you want to get in that angle, right? And that opportunity has been missed at so many levels.
Yeah.
That now we're stuck arguing with it with these old ass frameworks, and it's an uphill battle trying to talk about this with some people.
Yeah, for sure.
I hope that was coherent. I'm sorry if it wasn't, but
no, I mean, I think that really sums it up well. That it's I think that sort of the underlying goal of the Green New Deal, and what I think any meaningful environmental movement has to do, is sort of reconcile that you need a economic reckoning as much as you need an environmental one in order to really meaningfully change things. And like what I was kind of trying to get at too is like, with the Green New Deal, because it should emphasize like, like the green jobs and stuff like that, it's not as much, because I think that's like what has been successfully framed around environmental things. It's like, it's the trees, or it's your personal prosperity, and not, like, and we're talking to people who are, middle class, lower middle class, or even worse off. And that is not attractive at all. And to some extent, the longer things are delayed, the more that sacrifice might have to be a reality. But there's not, you have to sort of acknowledge that there's a way to do both that is not necessarily going to short end the little guy, right? They'll there will be economic opportunity, there'll be new economics opportunities while going to like a greener path.
Right, and that's like the bottom line, because this shows up in other issue battles too, right? Like just something that's seen as unrelated. Unions, for example.
Yeah,
you talk about expanding labor protections, and this same thing comes up. Well, isn't the union going to make it harder for us to keep our jobs? Isn't that going to put me in trouble with my employer? And people are locked into this kind of way of thinking where you never challenge the powerful players. You never challenge corporate interests. You never challenge business.
It's a hostage situation.
It's a hostage situation, right? Because like even we forgot to bring this up in the environmental bit, but this is the big thing: is like you could do everything right. You could recycle everything and wash your recyclables.
Mm-hmm.
You could grow your own food. You could put a solar panel on your house. You could never use another plastic thing in your life. It doesn't change the fact that you opting out of this consumer economy doesn't change the fact that everyone else is still locked into it. And the people who run this economy, the combination of state apparatus and corporate apparatus, are calling the shots. You could even argue, and this will get me canceled by so many people, that American corporate interest is our own centrally planned economy. It's not one that works, but it's one that delivers benefits to shareholders in that respect.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's kind of it at the end of the day, is what's not changing, despite how monstrous everything is getting, is like you don't get in the way of corporations and their profits. You don't get away with state actors helping corporations get their profits. And that's kind of what the project in Texas is, to an extent, right? Because I forgot what the case is, but that's what the Supreme Court's hearing, right? Or if not that, at least like the different Texas legal things that have been coming out over the months. I'm so confused.
I can't remember which one the Texas one was specifically, to be honest. It all just blends together.
Yeah, whatever this amorphous Texas secessionist legal turn is, we'll call it that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's what this kind of is yes, it's kind of monstrous that they want to enforce right-wing cultural values. But then also on the economic front, what they're basically saying is, fuck any regulatory accountability, fuck any framework for this. We're also opting out of that.
Yeah.
So it's a very bastardized theology. You know what I mean? It's like you're using this very bastardized evangelical framework, but you're also like taking the prosperity gospel up to 11, and it's like, actually these people get to rule your life because they made money 60 years ago or something.
Yeah. It's like, I think we've kind of, you really can't stress it enough that it's just kind of, it all falls down to this willful construction of this hostage situation, where in multiple ways, pretty much everything with the Democratic Party now feels like a hostage situation. Mm-hmm. Where it's very much just the framework of like, not accomplishing much, but if you don't support us, you will all die, more or less. And yeah, this is it's not the funnest of times to be around in the political scene.
I think hostage situation is the right way to look at this, even though it only serves to make us feel worse, because because I was saying earlier, like we should all have that sober realization of like, what are we dealing with right now? And that is also disappointing to hear. It's like, why do I got to sit and think when bad things are happening? And the thing is like, this hostage situation, one, the right has deployed it. But then, and I don't want to keep relitigating 2016 and 2020 either. But the establishment of the party has basically said, "Fuck you, we call the shots."
Yeah.
And I don't like throwing my hands up and absolving myself of responsibility. But I also just like in such a situation where you're a hostage, you know, what else can you do but then lay the blame at the feet of the Democratic Party and say, this was your job?
Yeah, I think, it's most frustrating because they have always framed it in the sense that, like, well, we're the ones best equipped to stop, the bullshit on the right. But, like, they've continued to capitulate, they've, just kind of conceded to it time and time again. And even, like, I'm not necessarily saying that, like, Supreme Court justices shouldn't have, like, any protections whatsoever, but, like, when they get a little harassed, Republicans are like, you have to pass protections for them. It's like, okay, let's do it immediately. Whereas, like, all these other crises, like, well, let's drag our feet a bit. Let's, wait till, like, people start showing up at our doors before we do anything. I mean, today, I believe it was, Kavanaugh's dinner was interrupted at Morton's or whatever by anti-abortion protesters. And, like, just the complete lack of irony when they're talking about this, like, they infringed his right to privacy. Yeah, well, he did it first. Like, it's just insane. Like, just the irony is completely dead when it comes to covering what happens to these judges. Like, oh, they deserve privacy, blah blah blah. Like, apparently no one else does. Or maybe if they did it to Amy Coney Barrett because she has a uterus, then it would be okay, but not Brett.
Dear God.
maybe anti-abortion protesters in DC, maybe try that strategy instead.
It's funny you bring this up, right? Because, like, and I'm not here to, like, running defense for other countries here, but this is just the observation that a lot of people like to talk about repression of dissent in other nations, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not going to deny that, like, you still have some freedom of expression rights in the United States, but at the same time, like, just look at, like, how every time they get just a little bit uncomfortable, they cry and make a scene about it. They call the cops on you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know if this would fly if we were looking at any other country, because we would have the rest of Reddit ready to, like, join a liberatory force to go free them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, speaking of the rest of the world, like, I don't know how much if it's that time on the outline yet, but this week, maybe this past 48 hours more specifically, has made me very jealous of the rest of the world in a number of ways.
As the time of this recording, so many things.
Yeah, and like, I joked before we went on that it like, with the international stuff, it feels like we are this was an emergency episode because of how timely some of these things are, which is completely serendipitous. And maybe after the doom and gloom of before, like, this was maybe a shiny beacon of hope. Some things maybe more than others. Not to construe anything I'm saying as condoning of certain behaviors, but so where do we start?
I guess I don't know. I'll start in order of, like, what I know least to what I know most. So it's just starting. President of the Philippines, son of former dictator Ferdinand Marcos, Bongbong Marcos, has COVID. In the same period, Sri Lanka has announced it is bankrupt and now entering negotiations with the IMF.
I'm not jealous of them, by the way. Just to be clear,
we're not laughing at their misfortune. This, like, people are in trouble, but god damn it, like, that's a horrible thing to have happen on top of everything.
The next two, though, there's a bit more. Let's start with the slightly older one, okay?
Yeah, let's start with
Boris.
What's going on in the UK, Bojo.
So, I guess he's no longer the British Trump, right?
Well, I don't. So the thing about the British Trump comparisons, like, he looks like Trump. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But, like, his style and affect is still kind of opposite to Trump. Like, Trump is this very frumpy, queenish kind of older guy from New York, despite being very wealthy. And then Boris Johnson looks like that, but then his breeding and pedigree and where he's gone to school, he's very much a posh UK lad. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But like, I mean, I was like reading this because like he resigned. Well, not bury the lead. He resigned, and I was like, oh, why? And like I looked into it, and I'm like, he resigned because he had a few parties, and he appointed he had a party during COVID lockdown. Okay, I'm not saying that, I'm not endorsing it, but okay. He had a party when Queen Elizabeth was stuck mourning her husband before his funeral.
Which that is doing numbers on his reputation. That is
yeah. It was like kind of a dick move, but again, like, and he appointed someone who he was aware had an alleged history of sexual misconduct. And I'm like, man, like the Trump administration had all of that and way more. And no one resigned. I mean,
that's so funny, right? Because it's like, where do different right wingers across different lines draw the line? You know what I mean?
Well, like, this is the big thing where, like, in general, where I'm like, man, like, imagine living in a country where your leaders resign.
Right.
Like, we're sitting at, and I was trying to find this figure that I saw earlier. It was about like, it kind of connected back to like the Democratic Party thing too, but like we're like, there's a lot of old people in Congress. More of them are Democrats. Oh, there it is. 41 sitting members who are 75 or older. 34 are Democrats, 7 are Republicans, and 13 of them are 80 or more. 11 Democrats, 2 Republicans.
And if you had like a UK style party, you could have the party chairman be like, "Okay, you're done. You're resigning."
Yeah, and like, I mean, like, this is like isn't like an age thing, but it's just like that's how like stubborn people in this country are when they're elected. They will hold on till like, at least a lot of them will like just hold on forever.
Well, and that's what's unique about our system, right? Is that we have parties that are basically loose associations that are necessary to run under.
Yeah.
But then like you hold the seat. You hold the seat, and it's up to you to give it up.
And it's wild. And like and I said, like, all those things, like, I'm not endorsing anything that he did, but like, if that was like the smoking scandal of like the Trump administration, I'd be like, all right, this is probably a witch hunt. Like, like, I'm like, all right, he's right. This Russia thing's a little out of hand. Like, if that was all he did, but like, it's like, this is like a Tuesday in the Trump White House.
Right.
What? And this was like, his PMs were resigning left and right. I think 28 of them left before he did. And I'm like, what? Like, my mind is just blown that like because he had a party because the Queen's.
Well, and I've been watching some of this, like even like a couple of months ago, there was this video of like Boris Johnson in the House of Commons or whatever the facility is called. And he's just getting roasted by everyone in the room for like getting caught with the scandal of like having a party during COVID. Yeah. And I don't know if it's just like, are people in the UK more like snitch worthy than us? Because like people were violating the lockdown left and right on both sides of the aisle here.
Yeah.
To go have parties and visit their family. And then Boris Johnson gets caught once and everyone's like, how dare you get away with it? We wanted to do that.
Right?
Like, it's a different kind of corruption almost. It's like, we're going to hold you accountable because we wanted to do it.
Basically, it's like, I mean, yeah, I mean, like, screw him for locking down the country and having a party, but like, who cares? Like, but like, no, like, I hate the guy in general. So like, cool.
Just as Americans looking in, like, this is like, what the fuck?
I mean, it's like, again, like, like, how many like politicians do we know explicitly violated like the COVID restrictions?
The most threadbare of restrictions in the United States, mind
remember
you.
Like the scandal when like Pelosi got her hair cut?
Yeah.
Like if she was in the UK, she would have resigned. We would have been better for it.
It's funny how like shame still exists in the United Kingdom among all things. Not for anything good, mind you, but it's like this principle of shaming someone into resignation still applies. Now, I don't know if he's immediately walking out of 10 Downing Street tomorrow. I think the plan is he's going to walk out for sure in August.
Yeah,
But,
something
you
like
know, the fact that like members of your party are like, this shit sucks, I'm walking out. That's amazing. And that's something that like I guess could never happen in the United States because like, you know, here it's up to you to hold your own seat. You kind of want it with or without the party's help. And your loyalty to the party can kind of be like, you know.
Well, and I mean, the best way to describe the American one is I remember, you know, like the infamous quote from Trump. He's like, I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and get away with it. My supporters would love me still. And it's like, yeah, that is the American system. You could murder someone in broad daylight, and it's on you to leave. No one else.
I mean, I'm just trying to think, like, who has resigned at all in the past 10 years? Maybe Al Franken Al Franken for like for sexual misconduct, and that's the only person who's ever resigned.
Did Conyers?
Conyers because of yeah. So they were the only two.
Well, his was actually serious.
His was very serious. Yeah. I'm trying to think who else has resigned. Fucking
just at like the federal level. I'm sure locally there's been other ones.
There's probably a couple at the state level.
In state, yeah. But yeah, and it's like it's always like Democrats that are being held accountable for things that are like, you know, way worse than their other colleagues are doing.
Right.
And it's just like, oh my god, like
it's bad if no one. It's bad if anyone does it. Period.
But it's like, I mean, the Franken thing, like it's just like you compare that to like anything that Trump was accused of, or like half like I mean, Jim Jordan just sitting there like on the Judiciary Committee of all things, you know. Matt Gaetz,
all of them should be resigned. All of them need to resign, if anything. But
yeah,
you know, it's oh my fucking god. So yeah, a slight anecdote in relation to that. A person on the street in the UK, I don't know what these interviews are called, where they just interview people randomly on the BBC or something, and they were asking her like, you know, why did you drop your support for Boris Johnson? And she said, it's because it was so upsetting to see the Queen alone at Prince Philip's funeral. And I'm like, what did you want Boris Johnson to do? Eat her pussy? What the fuck, man? What did Boris Johnson have to do with any of this? I don't like the guy at all, but like, what is he supposed to do about this? And maybe that's just us as Americans.
Because he wasn't alone while she was.
What the fuck?
But yeah, like that's literally like when I'm reading the scandal. It's like that's like listen, what?
Like I mean, you saw all the stuff with like the Royals and their 200-year anniversary or whatever thing is going on. It's stuff I cannot wrap my head around.
What about when Ginsburg died and Trump's like, oh wow, like that's so shocking.
You're telling me now? You're telling me now she died? Oh my god.
Like
she lived an amazing life, folks. God.
Like just it's just so it's such an alien idea that like this is like the scandal that brought down. And as I said, he clearly can't be the British Trump anymore because like Trump lost an election and he's still fucking saying he's president.
Oh
like
God.
Boris, like he left the Queen alone.
I know we talk about civic religion a lot on this podcast, but like understanding like the worship of royal figures is something I will never understand. I don't think I'm ever going to be able to wrap my brain around it.
No, I mean, what it was just in general, like I was thinking like the way like some people like kind of like they look up to like certain, you know, different like even just talking heads and stuff like that. And I was like thinking about like for like because there's been that popular Jordan Peterson meme, the you know the up
yours popular moralist left.
Up yours
woke moralist.
Woke
we'll
moralist.
See who cancels it. Okay.
Yeah.
Up yours woke moralist. We'll
like,
see who cancels who.
I'm just like, there are cringy people on the left, but like, can you imagine like having any type of like idolation for like Jordan Peterson or like Rush Limbaugh, you know, when he was still alive, or Alex Jones,
Matt Walsh.
Oh
my fucking god! Just a cringe gallery of
at least like Matt Walsh. No, not so much. I was like saying, cause like I mean, at least like Glenn Beck, I hate him. I don't agree with anything.
But Glenn
he says,
Beck
but
is like that weepy guy. You know what I mean?
he has like he looks like a normal person. Like I don't like see him and like just think like like it's like yeah like if I like isolate like my brain and like don't think about what he's saying, it's like okay, I could see why people, if you agree with him, would like him. But like these other ones, it's like what? Or Ben Shapiro? Like I mean like all these other ones that are just like
I mean Ben Shapiro, like literally these are the guys who talk about like alpha and beta. They talk about like manlets for like short dudes, and then like here comes Ben Shapiro. And you guys are like, this guy's an alpha. Oh my god, I want to base my entire personality on this guy. What the fuck is wrong with you guys? Have some shame, have some consistency. What the fuck?
I mean, that's just a side tangent, but it was just like it was just something I was thinking about, like that was like tied to like the royal worship and stuff like that. And I guess other shout out to Alex Jones. His inside scoop was wrong. Trump did not announce on July 4th.
Which yeah, I that would have been the prime time for Trump to announce because he likes doing the rallies. That's something we've noticed. He loves doing rallies. He loves the crowds. He doesn't like anyone there, but he loves getting the crowd like cheering for him.
Yeah.
And he's done a couple of them on the off season. And there was this like, there are these rumors about is there going to be a Trump versus DeSantis primary? But the prophecy of Trump declaring candidacy this July 4th fell through entirely.
Sure did.
The fight for freedom remains unfulfilled.
For the other international news story, I want to frame it around this tweet that I just saw from Bridget Gabrielle. I've seen her around. I don't remember who she is. The January 6th committee should cancel its upcoming hearings out of respect for President Trump while he is in mourning for the loss of a great friend, Shinzo Abe.
I'm gonna keep it real with you, Shinzo Abe. Nobody's solving that decline in birth rate.
Have you ever seen a political? I don't honestly know that we don't know the motives of the shooter yet. Have you ever seen an assassination more dunked on than this?
It's honestly the responses to this are so like the ones that are serious. The ones that are serious are so cringeworthy. Like the one you mentioned. There's an equally cringeworthy one where it was some like Channel 4 presenter, and she's like, "I came from a town where Honda was the biggest employer. We miss you, Mr. Abe." I'm like, oh god, okay, that's so any genuine response is going to be bad, but then there's just everyone memeing this.
That's the kind of person that like
did not know
the day before was like, fuck Honda, buy American, like, right? Like
that kind of shit,
no loyalty, like from that person. But it's so weird. Like
I saw another one that was like never ask a man his salary, never ask a woman her age, never ask Shinzo Abe what his relatives did during World War II.
Yeah. When everyone's just like in solidarity with Shinzo Abe, we're going to ignore this happened. Did you say this was like the wildest one too? So like I guess to give like the facts of the situation, a guy with a handmade gun, basically like a shotgun, just like shot him during a campaign event.
It's not even a shotgun. It was like gun guts, like duct taped together.
Oh jeez!
It was literally like the Force of Nature from Team Fortress. I don't know how they made this thing. But yeah, Abe resigned like I want to say 2 years ago, but he still like was influential in LDP circles and was making speeches. Yes. And the guy who shot him, if I understand correctly, was
like a veteran.
Yeah, he worked in the security forces and had since been
I think they're self-defense forces, but
that's what I meant to say. But yeah, like he had worked there and then had been unemployed for some time, and unemployment in Japan I think is one of those underreported issues.
Yeah. So like it kind of shades of like the Reagan attempted assassination, except that was an actual government employee that was fired. But similar, like kind of and this is kind of the history of a lot of political assassinations. It's someone who down on their luck and wants to take out someone they seem deemed responsible. The New York Times, when they reported this, deserves special credit. Breaking news: Shinzo Abe, Japan's former prime minister, collapsed after a gunshot was heard as he delivered a speech, the country's public broadcaster said.
First of all, that headline is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Collapsed after gunshot. Was this after
No, gunshot was heard.
So is this like after the Al
Jazeera?
Jazeera? Remember when the Al Jazeera journalist was shot and they got so much heat for saying she got shot?
Yeah.
Are they just now just going to say a gunshot was heard and someone fell? We don't know what happened.
I don't know. Well, and like, it wasn't that journalist actually shot.
She was shot by the IDF. Yeah.
Like, so like the initial reporting was correct. It was just that like, well, you know, you jumped the gun on it, and you know, not really jumped the gun, but you know, you upset some important people.
Yeah.
But it's just like, it's, you know, is this because of that? Is this just like the way they talk about their you know, the way they talk about like police shootings, where it's like, you know, suspect killed after, you know, or dies after police, you know, attempt to arrest, like, you know, like always like kind of obscuring it. But like the way it was just like a gun, like if you just read it, it's like a gunshot was heard and he collapsed. Like, did he faint? Like, was it just the shock of a gunshot? It's like, no, he was fucking murdered. But
this is the kind of shit that makes people go insane, right? Because like there is a history of like very suspicious political assassinations in Japanese political.
Yeah.
And then if the New York Times is like writing the headline intentionally like that, you're gonna make someone just squint a little too hard and just like, what do they know that I don't?
Yeah, it's wild. And probably the craziest thing I've seen with this is some French politician.
Oh yeah.
Blamed. So he said it was like leftists that killed Shinzo Abe, and he posted a picture of the quote unquote shooter, and it is none other.
Say it.
Than one video game legend, Hideo Kojima.
God damn it!
You know, fucking, you know, the creator of Solid Snake himself. Just blew a hole in Shinzo Abe's chest, according to this French politician. Obviously, Hideo Kojima has nothing to do with this, but
like I remember reading about that, and I was just like,
how
is Kojima linked to this? Then I found out the truth, but it's like,
how did he just like Google Japanese guy and was like, this is the shooter? Like, I mean, I know like right wingers have had a thing lately of like trying to misidentify shooters for their own agenda. I mean, obviously the it was the school one, right, where they were like, Candace Owens was trying to say it was like this transgendered person.
Yeah.
Like, just randomly, it didn't even remotely resemble the actual suspect. But just like, oh hey, like we'll actually care if we can, you know, weaponize this for our political agenda. And like, I just don't know. I'm like, how did this person get like that picture? Like, was a staffer trolling him? Like what possessed him to like post a picture of Hideo Kojima?
Does he hate Metal Gear as a series? Is that what this is about?
Yeah, you know,
is he blaming the leftward turn we're seeing in some people to Metal Gear? Is that what's going on here?
I have no clue, but yeah, I mean, this is, and it's just so weird too. Like a country, like, I mean, like, I know we're like making a lot of light of this. I mean, maybe
well, first of all, we also have to mention another tragedy in Japan on the same day. The creator of Yu-Gi-Oh died on the same day.
And I've seen people say, like, you know, he died. Like, what does Shinzo Abe have on the? To be fair, I've seen more heartfelt tributes for the death of what's his name?
It's been a while since I've seen anything Yu-Gi-Oh related. I forgot the creator's name, but it is sad.
Yeah, Takahashi Kazuki.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen more heartfelt tributes for his death than I have for Shinzo Abe.
I mean, it's very odd what's happened, especially because it's just happened. We're not even getting the full story yet. I doubt we're going to get the full story for a while.
I mean, it's just so wild that it's like, I mean, like there's like no gun deaths in Japan, like or that are like reported and whatnot, and yet like this important figure is just killed in broad daylight.
Right.
Like there was a video out. I mean, you don't like actually see it. It's like one of those like crappy ones where like the camera guy got spooked and dropped it when he heard a gunshot, and you see Abe's head on the ground. But it's just so weird that like yeah, like it's a wild situation. I mean, like I don't know. I don't really have a whole lot else to say about it right now. It's provided some quality memes. Like
it's provided some quality memes, and I think it's I think a lot of people are correctly talking about Abe's record of defending Japanese war crimes during World War II, which not to say that these are exactly good things, but also it is a silver lining of this that we can finally have a conversation about Japan as an imperial partner rather than that cool place where we get our tech and anime from,
Yeah.
Maybe, people can come to see, some of that, but I don't know. The news is very fresh. The memes are hot off the presses, and time will tell how these events will play out. Right now, all we're doing is bearing witness and posting shit.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, Shinzo Abe's true legacy is giving people some good laughs in the afterlife.
Dear God. And I mean, and for everyone asking us, like, why are you making light of this? I mean, I'm not going to feel bad for someone who defended war crimes. I know that's controversial. I know that's, upsetting to admit, but if you can't talk about these things when someone's alive, you got to do it when they're dead, man. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, to me, it's more so just like everything is surrounding it. That like it's just the act itself. I don't condone it. Obviously, it's awful, but
it came out of left field. It came out of left field.
It's just like literally like we had this show scheduled, and then all of a sudden, like Shinzo Abe has been shot. Shinzo Abe is dead. Here are some jokes about it.
Now, here's where things get fun. If you want to game this out, because Secretary of State Anthony Blinken is apparently in Asia right now, and had some choice words on this. Do you think this is going to trigger escalation of activities in Taiwan or not?
No,
I hope not. I really hope not, because I don't think America has the means for another conflict. I think Ukraine has stopped being a form of passive entertainment for people at this point.
Well, and yeah, I mean, I think the other thing with Ukraine is, and it's like the thing that like is never really implicitly talked about is that like it's basically we're just funneling the money into our own pockets with the military industrial complex and whatnot. It's like, yeah, we're giving them all this arms, but like we're paying American manufacturers to make them and ship them. Like we're getting that money essentially. It's just, a few guns disappear. Like who cares? Like that's that. I mean, like I'm not saying I don't care. I'm just saying that's like the general mindset, right? It doesn't matter. They don't perceive like real consequences for that kind of stuff. It's just this is a good excuse to flush money in through the military and whatnot. I'm sure there are some heartfelt sentiments for the Ukrainians, even among those in power. I'm sure that I'm sure there's some genuine desire to help them, but a lot of that aid money is, that a lot of people I know a lot of people stateside are critical of it. It's not like it's not doing what they believe it's doing. It is largely going to like, essentially Americans. Name out the Americans you want it to, but Americans nonetheless.
Yeah, I don't know how to respond to it. It also goes to show neither does Kamala Harris.
Oh my god. Let's talk about Kamala for a bit.
Yeah.
I mean, that might be a good way to like just close it off. So she's been making the rounds lately, and I'm not gonna pretend that I thought she was like a fantastic orator before.
Mhm.
She kind of struck me as like someone who's clearly trying to like emulate the style of Obama, but like is missing that more organic charm, but isn't like awful at it. Like if like on a spectrum of like Barack Obama to like Marco Rubio, I don't know if he's like the fair bottom line, but like, you know, just a guy who's just pure talking points,
Yeah.
nothing of substance. I thought she was, you know, like she was above average.
Right.
But man, like I mean, did someone in the White House just say like, "Hey, a lot of people think that you're like pulling the strings behind this administration. Can you go out there and just look like the dumbest human being constantly? Can you every time we ask you to go out there, can you just like do everything in your power to kill that idea?" Because, go ahead.
It's funny you bring that up, right? Because we now perceive Kamala as this very like weird and like very woozy figure, but I can recall a time where I think it was the Senate primary in California. I think it was 2016 about, and she was running against someone even more unhinged than her. Like at the end of the debate, the opponent basically dabbed at the end of their statement, and Kamala's there looking confused. So I think like for those of us who remember that image, we probably had this idea of like, okay, Kamala's normal, but we forgot.
Yeah, not going hardcore into like catering and stuff like that.
Right, but it's like just because someone looks normal in comparison doesn't mean that like they have a coherent or even adaptable presence. Because this is another criticism I had of her during the Kavanaugh hearings when she was a senator.
Yeah,
was you're this famed prosecutor. You have this reputation of like crushing crime and getting to the truth. Where was it when we needed it? You were like one of the last people to speak during that hearing. You know what I mean?
mm-hmm.
So that was another point where I'm just like, huh? The top cop in California?
That's kind of not in her entire domain.
That's also true. That's also true. But just again, from a rhetorical standpoint, you
Sure.
know, that's like, where were you there? And
it
then
felt like shit. What's her name? The other Democratic woman on that committee that ran for president.
Gillibrand?
Not Gillibrand, the other one. The one that like was mean that threw staplers.
Klobuchar.
I'm like sheepies. I'm like I reference her in like one of my dissertation chapters because it's like she says on the debate, and that this has nothing to do with that. But she was like more so the highlight of that like hearing. I thought she was the one who definitely kind of like soaked up any real coverage that you got out of that. But like, you know, speaking, and I was thinking about that for like the 2020 debates too. Like, I mean, Kamala had said a few things that I thought were like I don't know, like when she
that girl was me.
I don't think that was. I thought that was like a, you know, that was savvy. I mean, yeah,
it was savvy, but then you have to realize that was scripted and set up. Like not like set up by the moderators, but like she was trained to say that line.
Yeah. I mean, it was smart, but that being said, like it does everything that she said to Biden looks hypocritical in hindsight.
Right.
Like you dug in deep into a guy who you are now you know, serving and seemingly like trying your best to look like the worst second fiddle possible. But like I mean, like outside of like when she was arguing with Warren over like banning Trump's Twitter account, I never thought she came across like particularly incompetent in those debates. She usually like held her own. She was fine. But man, every time they like send her out there for these things, like there's the one after the Roe v. Wade overturn where, you know, they're like, well, what, like, you know, like voters like want you to do something. She's like, well, do what? And then like
I can pull up the clip.
Then goes into like full like robot mode, talking about the child tax credit that isn't getting renewed. So like, who cares? And you know, like that one wasn't as bad, but like there's these other ones where it's just straight up every like speech you've ever conducted, like your presentation you've ever conducted where you didn't know really the heart of the issue, where you're just like, I'm going to say things that are things that might mean something if something is something that you want to hear. And you're basically that. Basically, like for anyone who's seen The Office, it's like literally like the scene where
You did it perfectly. You did it
yeah,
perfectly.
like, it was like basically the scene where Michael Scott like goes, to like corporate, and they're like, "Oh, hey, we want to know like how like why are you so successful compared to like other branches?" And that scene is basically like 100% two of these speeches recently. There's the gun one where she's talking about like the seriousness of the situation is that you grasp the seriousness of the situation because of how serious it is, and like I couldn't believe it, and I can't remember what the other one was.
Hang on, I pulled up the clip here.
Yeah, it's wild.
Let's see if I can get the audio to work this time. Hang on. Share a tab. Share tab audio. Let's see if this one works.
Yeah, that's the one.
We gotta take this stuff seriously as you are, because you have been forced to have to take it seriously. The whole nation should understand and have a level of empathy to understand that this can happen anywhere, in any peace-loving community, and we should stand together and speak out about why it's gotta stop.
Madam Vice President?
It ends okay, but it's just like that lead up that we have to take this stuff seriously as you are, because it's serious, and like it's just like what. And as I said, like it has to be deliberate. These like she's cut from like that like Hillary Clinton cloth. I'm not just like, I mean, policy wise she's not that different, but like everyone accused Hillary of just being like this machine that was like perfectly prepared for every speech she ever gave, to say exactly what she was going to say, exactly how she said it, exactly when she said it. And I think Kamala was like, she came across as like a slightly more genuine version of that, but now it's like we're not giving you any prep. Like,
that's a good point you bring up, right? Because like when we talk about American public figures, right, there's like the speech givers, and then there's also the who are they off the clock when you meet them at the county fair, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And usually people who seem to do good at both are the people kind of glom onto, right? That's where like, people say they like Bernie because he's like the same person in both.
Yeah.
Joe Biden is considered good because like whether or not
he's not fumbling over his words and whatnot. He
seems personable to people.
He seems like the same, anytime that you've seen him just like talking with someone, seems like the same guy is giving
it's
a
like,
speech.
okay, that's Scranton Joe. And then like with Hillary Clinton, that you bring it up, she had a prepared set of responses she gave, which is why like she seems kind of phony. Was like, hey, I'm chilling in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, or like Pokemon Go to the polls.
Yeah, I mean,
he has these corny lines, but she prepares them. But then like when you get to when you try to catch her on her off day, there's still a person behind the mask. You know what I mean? Like remember when I think it was in the 2016 race where someone asked her about fracking. And she just unloaded like, how dare you ask me that? You wouldn't ask a man that. You know what I mean? But there's someone there and there's someone coherent. With Kamala, what I've noticed is like, especially post the primary of 2020, her ability to speak on herself off the cuff is limited for some reason. Like when they asked her, like, so why would you run with Joe Biden after that? Because it's a debate. Haha. Like, it sounded like, oh, she's just brazenly corrupt, or she didn't know what to say.
Yeah, like I mean, it would have been that hard. I mean, I did not prepare this at all. Just say, you know what, he might be. Yeah. I don't regret what I said about him. I still have like some reservations about, but you know what, Trump is the most racist piece of shit in this country ever. I will team up with someone who I think has like evolved a bit as a person, even if I question his history, to beat him.
Something like that. Something like that.
Like, I mean, that was probably overly harsh of Biden to be like acceptable as a response, but That took me 2 seconds to come up with.
Yeah,
Like,
you can pull this kind of stuff
surely
out of your
something,
ass. Exactly,
like-
exactly. I just, it augurs very little hope. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's just it's wild because there's this idea that like like ever since she was chosen as the running mate, everyone was like, oh well, she's the heir apparent to the Democratic Party, right? And
Mhm.
I mean, a lot of this was just whispers and whatnot, but I think it was pretty obvious that was not the case. Like there was concerns like, oh, she's too ambitious for vice president, like, which is like a weird thing to say about a vice president. When clearly like I mean, I guess like, I mean, are we going to say that the actual last vice president who became president, Joe Biden, like, was he just like fine? Did his ambition was fine? He clearly wanted to run
Mhm.
again, but just like a lot of stuff where it seems like there is like, and I don't want to say that like there's obviously palace politics and drama and whatnot, but it just seemed to me that like she's not wanted as the heir apparent by whoever the powers that be in the Democratic Party are. If they even, they're probably just trying to figure out how they can, Walt Disney themselves into staying in power forever.
Mhm.
As far as like the wing of the party, but like I'm like, is this deliberate to come across like this? Because again, nothing would give the indication that she would be like this.
It's very odd. I almost wonder, like, did she just have a breakdown during the pandemic and never fully recover from it? And that's me wildly hypothesizing about someone I don't
Projecting
know,
a little.
projecting a little, and honestly, like, again, I don't know that, and I'm not a therapist. Do not ever cite me for that kind of shit, But it's what this points to is like, who is the heir apparent generation of the Democratic Party? Because you could argue it was Obama, but there's that alleged beef between him and the Clinton faction, which is now aging. They want to come back in, but I don't know if they have what it takes to stay long term. And whatever youth support,
I think and like, not to get into like deep, Democratic deep state conspiracy and whatnot, I think Obama disrupted the plans.
He
I
did.
think that's apparent in a lot of ways. And there's certain things where I think he never really set up his legacy properly either, in my opinion, because he kind of enabled, like when he gave off the DNC because he just didn't give a shit about it to like Wasserman Schultz, so like right back to the Clinton faction. And you can argue that to some extent, like Biden is like a carry on of that, but like Biden is like was sort of the the pick to like throw a bone to those guys in the first place.
Biden is almost unique in his like position in the party. He's kind of like the guy who got a pat on the back from all like the secessionist and Southern Democrat guys from the civil rights era. So
he's a weird unity candidate, but
right?
Like, unity is like two different Democratic parties that existed decades apart.
Yeah.
It is that one that got along with those Southern Dems turned Republicans. Some of them remain Southern Dems. Gets along with that mainstream part of like the party now, but like of the younger generation of the party is kind of not really in touch with him and his experiences, and he's not in touch with theirs. And it's a weird way to like frame it, but I think like that is like kind of the story of where Biden fits as far as like this.
I buy it.
Democratic dynasty.
It makes sense. Because like the only existing dynasty at this point, because Obama ran and turned tail, and he wants to get his Netflix deals. That's kind of where Obama's at. Hillary is
already got Spotify.
Oh dear God, he could have just been a podcaster early on. God damn it. And then again, you have the Clintons with their faction. Bill has basically aged out and is a ghoul at this point. Hillary is going to come back. Let's see how that plays out. I mean, I don't know who else is left in the running, because that's what 2020 was. Is like, who are they going to hand it to? Buttigieg is the most ambitious, but no one likes him.
Well, it's weird too because it's like the ones that you would assume would be like the next generation. It's like Kamala and Buttigieg, and like that skips like multiple generations
of like existing representatives in like the House. You know what I mean? Like
it's wild. Like when you look at in that packed field, you had like Bernie and and Warren as like these rogue upstarts who are still like the same age bracket, but like
right.
not really from that like same cloth. Then you had like Biden representing that wing, and then like who's like the youngest candidate after them? I mean maybe it was someone like I think of what's the fuck is his name? Colorado guy.
Was it Bennett or
Yeah, Bennett.
or Hickenlooper? There were two of them.
There was two.
Hickenlooper
Oh,
and Bennett, yeah.
He was Colorado too, wasn't he?
Yeah.
God, what a weird.
Well,
like,
Bennett was also like the unity ticket kind of guy, but Bennett is like that. There's a very weird like dying breed of Democrat now of like mountain state guy who's either a senator or a governor of the state, and he kind of like can do backslapping with Republicans, but is fundamentally okay with gay people kind of shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So he fits in the party.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Hickenlooper's probably like the third oldest guy. I mean, I know they had
Hickenlooper is
Bloomberg,
like,
but like that's just
Hickenlooper was the kind of like neoliberal turn kind of guy. That's what I see him as. But
yeah,
he was ousted very quickly.
Yeah, and I don't see him making he's in the Senate now, I believe. I don't think he's not presidential material again. I don't. He's just.
But like what you were saying about jumping generations, wouldn't Tim Ryan be like the next logical pick? And even no one's fucking with him either. Yeah, I mean, but just in terms of the age bracket.
Yeah, he's 48. Like that's quite a jump down. Oh man, but he embarrassed himself just by like going on that debate stage.
Don't yell at me. Like what the fuck, man? This is just how Bernie Sanders talks. Why do you think he's?
It's
yelling?
Just like it's funny. Like I'm looking at his Wikipedia page because I was like trying to remember his face, and like he has a much more personable picture here. But like I just remember him on that debate stage. He looked like a scared dog.
Yeah,
just like you could not take him seriously at all. Like, yeah, it's weird. Like how they're like. I mean, I'm not saying that's bad. I mean, that's good. If anything, that like we would have some younger blood. Hopefully, yeah. Kamala's 57. She's way older than Tim Ryan.
Jesus.
And 57. That's the new like 18 in DC. Like,
right.
That's like the 21-year-olds. They're the ones that can actually drink. Tim Ryan's the one who has to, he has to take the. He still has to take the bus to school.
He's got to call an older cousin, bro. Can you please get a case of Miller's for me, dog? Please.
He's the designated driver.
Ah, God. But yeah, I think the youngest cohort is probably Pete Buttigieg, and then whatever young representatives are in the House. But it's like, even then, it's like the squad was like a faction, you could say, at a point, and they've fizzled out at this point.
Yeah, I mean, like it's like they exist so much. Like their relevancy feels like deeply tied to just the fact that the right wing portrays them as like the true leaders of the Democratic Party.
But their clout within like the progressive or proto-socialist left, whatever you want to call this shit anymore, like has also dwindled.
Yeah,
and
it's
like their media clout is also gone.
Yeah, I mean, like the media clout's a little there, but like you're right in the sense. I mean, I think that their media clout is probably better when they're in the minority, which isn't good for like political clout. But it's at least people like the media, just the way it works, it wants to focus on the underdogs kind of as they cast them at least, and that's why like the Ted Cruz's of the world, when they're not in power, always soak up a lot of attention. But yeah, I mean, I feel like their political clout, I mean, part of it is just like it's sort of weird where it's like you have the like a lot of the people that are like the true left who are like, oh, well, they like compromised on this bill, fuck them. They don't represent me anymore. And then you have like kind of like the broader progressive caucus within the Democratic Party, and it's just like that's such a grab bag of like anyone who's like comfortable with outwardly identifying themselves that way for clout and isn't concerned that it's going to scare off donors to like people who are actually progressive.
Right. It was always a nebulous term at best, but I think it was like it always hinted towards like elements of the Democratic Party that are willing to take a slight populist turn, and I think they found a way to kind of neuter it effectively at this point.
Yeah, and then, like, I mean, it's like always like the trick with like when it comes to like labels for you know, what do we call ourselves? You know, we wouldn't identify as liberals, certainly, but you know, us personally, but you know, the Democratic Party probably would, but that has deeper connotation than just the Americanized context of it. And it's just...
No, I hear you, because like that's the biggest thing that gives me pain in having any political discussion about America is everyone's terminology means nothing. The terms are always shifting. Leftist, liberal, and Marxist mean the same thing to people depending on who you ask.
And those people are probably very confused if they ever listen to the show.
Right.
Where we've, called out liberals and stuff like that. And they're like, but they are liberals. Like, and
it's like, but like trying to explain to people that a Democrat and a Republican are both liberals, that hurts people's brains, man. Yeah. You cannot have discussions with some people because of that.
Yeah. It's like, these meetings are all worthless. And it doesn't help that the ones that we try to make are like have meaning, just get appropriated anyways. Libertarianism is like something that usually has a much more positive connotation.
Well, it's literally like it's something that they stole from the anarchists, unfortunately. Yeah. And like whatever like rigor is that's there in libertarian thinking came from anarchist thought, and they stole it, they plagiarized the fuck out of it and bastardized it, and now it gets to run as an alternative to the Democrats and Republicans. Ugh, gross stuff. I'm trying to think. Even like the fucking term Nazi. God, that's a famous one, isn't it? They run as the National Socialists to like piggyback off of the popularity of the Socialist Party, and there you go. Everyone just runs on it because words don't mean anything apparently.
And then like whenever like a conservative like discovers that that's what Nazi means.
Exactly.
Like I finally got you guys.
I cracked the code. They act like they really did something with that, and then you got to go in and explain the whole thing about like that's not what it means. They did it to capitalize, but at that point, I don't know if you remember that Reagan quote where he's like, "If you're explaining, you're running behind."
Yeah. Which is, I mean, like literally, like, is that his like biggest legacy to like the conservative movement and like Republican movement period?
It's just, guys, words don't mean anything. You can say whatever you want.
But like, I mean, just like that's like their tactic is it's just like, well, let's make the other side always explain and work from behind, and that's literally everything. We talked about it the last time, right? With like all this like these like different like trans issues and stuff like that, where we have to like we still have to take that like awful bad faith criticism about like groomers and stuff like that at face value and like diffuse it, but it misses the point, and like they're able to just go on the attack on every issue while we make zero progress.
Yeah, because there's never a discussion in good faith, and like anytime like the response is, well, okay, if they're not going to take us seriously, then we should just forcefully say no. We should be aggressive. I'm not necessarily saying violence, but it's like if someone says something hurtful and you just fart on the mic and walk away and protest, that's seen as crude and crass. But like that's kind of how I feel about it. Like we're basically being asked to fight with our hands behind our backs.
Yeah,
you're fighting with no honor and no rules, and if violence is seen as out of touch or out of taste or you're always playing the defensive. Why play the game?
Yeah.
And especially like I've said, like, you know, the Democrats have basically come in and stolen any popular energy out of the woodwork and said, we got this under control. I mean, I guess it's on us to lay the blame at their feet and be like, sorry, you guys did it. This was your idea. Here we are. What that's going to amount to, what change this brings, I don't know. I am, like I've said, still looking for answers. I am looking for ways to do something meaningful in my life. And I encourage everyone to keep looking for what that is. But, you know, until then, we're all here in the greenhouse gaslighting ourselves.
Yeah. I think that's a good note to go out on.
That's a good note to go out on, especially on our 50th episode.
Oh, wow.
This is episode 50. Yeah. Well, thanks again, Josh, for being, you know, a great person to do this show with.
And no
thanks
problem.
to all our listeners and everyone who's helped out with this project. You can find all our links to social media in the description and ship below. Before we sign off, there is another show that is also struggling to make it to 50 episodes. Josh, do you want to plug MonsterPop?
Yeah, so once again, I am on the MonsterPop podcast, a pro wrestling podcast. Me and my co-hosts, commentating on all the news and quite a few of the latest shows and whatnot. I think it's we have fun doing it. I think our listeners so far enjoy it. It was actually kind of funny, like speaking of the labels and whatnot. The episode's about to come out. One of my co-hosts talks about the kind of like how you identify and whatnot politically. It's like, I identify as a leftist, and when people ask me what the difference between that is and a liberal, it means that I'll kick your ass. I'm like, that's like the simplest way to put it, but I'm like, you know what? He's kind of right. Like, that is like the underlying difference.
Yeah. All in all, MonsterPop is a great show. Even if you don't know a lot about wrestling, I recommend listening to it. The guys are very accessible, and you can get a lot of info through osmosis. And I'll plug the links to their show in the description as well. So, till then, take care, dear listeners. We'll see you on the flip side. Bye-bye.